Thank you, and I would like to welcome Jeremy Lent. And Jeremy, you've been an inspiration to so many people, talking about the aspects of patterning, the aspects of connection, which also were part of the conversation in the previous panel. I think that sort of points to these emerging patterns and the patterns that are kind of taking us away from our collective human potential. So I would like to welcome you into this circle that is emerging, and I hope that part of the mission of the forum is to really discover how different communities, different spaces can see themselves as a part of that, what I could call meta tribe, a kind of tribe that is still to awaken, to recognize itself, and to see that we all have some shared role to serve in the world. Jeremy, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Pavel. And what a wonderful honor to be able to share some of these ideas here in this conversation. And I especially love this theme of planetary consciousness, because I think we'll see that what I'm offering today leads to exactly that possibility of what could be there if we apply that to actually thinking about our entire civilization. So I'm going to share the screen, and hopefully we'll have time before this 30 minutes is up for a little bit of Q&A. But without further ado, I'll take you through what I've prepared to share with you. And if I share the screen right now, let's see if this is working. Is everyone able to see the screen the way it should look like? Great. So I'm going to talk to you about envisioning an ecological civilization. And I'll start off with something that kind of just shared grounding, if you will, something that we all pretty much know, so I don't need to spend too much time on this. We're facing a climate emergency, right? And we know that right now we're heading towards a catastrophic temperature increase by the end of the century. And even if we were to shift all the way back down to 2 degrees warming by the end of the century, which seems almost inconceivable the way things are looking, even that scientists are telling us is a prescription for disaster. But here's the thing, when we look at something like this shared understanding of the climate emergency, we need to recognize that even that is really just nothing more really than a symptom of an even deeper underlying pathology of how we're relating to the earth, to our only home. Again, I can be real brief here because most of us know some, if not all of these details, the vast ecological destruction that our civilization is causing across the board. Just a few pointers, things like there's been a 69% decline in animal populations worldwide since 1970 alone. We're right now looking at the beginning of the 6th great extinction of species, only this one is caused by one particular species, our own. And we're looking at the annihilation of coral reefs worldwide this century. We're looking at, by the UN's own reports, 95% of Earth's land will be degraded by the middle of this century. But of all these statistics, the one that really blows me away the most is this, that at current rates, by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean by weight than fish. So how do we get to this unbelievable place of destroying our only home? Well, as Pavel just mentioned really briefly, I did study this for some years, and I wrote a book called The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. And I won't go into this book in detail other than to say what arose from that. A realization that came from that book is this recognition that culture shapes values, and those values shape history. And so by the same token, it's today's values that will shape our future. And if we look just real briefly at what those values are, it can really be summarized maybe best by this kind of picture. Like, our dominant values are based on separation. Here are these people separate from each other, connected only with their technology, separate from even the food they're about to eat, not even thinking where it might have come from. And if we look one level deeper in that modern story of separation, we see that these are the things that are implicitly communicated in basically almost every mainstream media output, every conversation, every article. Ideas that nature is a machine, the humans are separate from nature, that humans are essentially selfish and competitive, that human progress arises from the conquest of nature, that the earth is a resource to exploit for human benefit, and that ultimately the purpose of life is basically just to get wealthy and powerful. And this way of looking at things, even though it's accepted nowadays that that's just the way the world is, it's a very unique worldview that arose only in one place in time and space in early modern Europe, which is best summarized really by Francis Bacon, who said, gave this clarion call, how we need to establish and extend the power of dominion of the human race itself over the universe and render ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. And the Europeans took this idea very seriously. They did begin to conquer nature as well as other continents. And that led to the rise of basically global imperialism and colonialism. And that worldview of separation from that basis began to take over the world, seeing nature as a resource, seeing other people merely as resources, leading to like a sense of white supremacy of these white Europeans thinking that they could and should control basically what happens to everybody else, and human supremacy, the sense that humans have the right to control what happens with the rest of non-human nature, and leading to these fundamental values of extraction and exploitation, which ultimately has manifested in the last 100 or couple of hundred years in global capitalism. And so that right now we live in a society where of the 100 largest economies in the world, 69 of them are not even countries, but are transnational corporations designed to maximize shareholder value above all else. And it's a system that works really great to mint billionaires, leading to the greatest inequality in history, where the wealthiest couple of dozen billionaires own as much wealth as half the entire world's population of 4 billion people. And it's done a great job of that consumption and production, leading to what's been called the Great Acceleration since the Second World War. And it continues that way. It's projected to triple with all that destruction. The amount of production consumption expected to triple by 2060, which is why we're blowing away these planetary boundaries that have been identified by Johan Rockström and his team, like a safe operating space for humanity. Of the 9 planetary boundaries, we've blown away most of them. And scientists are warning us that soon it'll be too late to shift course away from our failing trajectory, that there's a very big risk we'll end our civilization. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls it collective suicide. So this is where we are headed right now. And when we look at this century that we're in right now, we need to recognize that we're undergoing one of the greatest transformations in all of the human experience. There's only been a couple of these transformations where almost every aspect of the human lived experience and values shifted. One is from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, roughly 10,000 years ago. In other words, that rise of the scientific revolution a few hundred years ago. Another will happen this century. We can be pretty sure about this. We can't be sure yet exactly what that transformation there was going to be. Is it going to be that collapse that scientists and many others are warning us about? Or it could be something else, something maybe from a moral standpoint, maybe even more egregious, like a split between the elites who end up developing ways to connect themselves neurally and with the internet and explore things like transhumanism, while the rest of the world collapses? Or could we just possibly lead to a trajectory of sustainable flourishing? And that's what I'm going to focus the rest of this time on, this possibility of a transformation in our entire civilization right now, but one that could lead to a sustainable and flourishing future, one that more and more people are calling an ecological civilization. So this would require basically changing not just some aspect of our civilization, but the underlying operating system of it, from that system of extraction and exploitation that we can think of as global capitalism, to a foundation that would be based on an affirmation of life. It would be a transformation from a wealth-based society to one that is life-based. And it would be looking at a global cultural and economic system that actually promoted sustainable flourishing for humans and Earth. So the overriding objective of this fundamentally different civilization would be to create the conditions basically for all people to flourish as part of a thriving, living Earth. And this vision of an ecological civilization, I want to emphasize, is not just some idea that's been sort of dreamed up by a few people in some sort of smoke-filled room somewhere, but is really just giving a name to an emerging vision that is arising from all around the world, from diverse sources, from indigenous sources. Many of you are familiar with concepts of like buen vivir or sumac corse in Latin America, or Ubuntu. Community sources like the rights of nature movement, permaculture, transition towns movement, theories of the commons, the degrowth movement, then agroecology, spiritual movements such as engaged Buddhism, deep ecology, traditional Chinese principles, Christian liberation theology, and so many different political movements. The point is that all of these movements, these thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of movements around the world, are really moving towards the same source of from the same source towards the same vision of a life-affirming civilization. So I want to take a moment to think what that actually what does that mean, a life-affirming civilization? And earth scientists have learned enough about ecosystems that we can really envision what would it look like if we actually built our civilization based on the same kinds of principles that have allowed ecosystems to be so successful and resilient? Basically, how do living systems self-organize? And when we look at ecosystems, we can see that sometimes for millions of years, they've achieved a harmony within themselves. So in spite of all the things that can happen, exogenous and endogenous factors, they maintain resilient and healthy. And there are certain principles that earth scientists have recognized that you can see in ecosystems, such as, these are some names they give, like diversity, symbiosis, balance, regeneration. I'm not going to go into each of these because we simply don't have the time. Now I'll focus on just one, maybe the fundamental principle that is that top one, symbiosis. And a key understanding of this is that when we look at life, when we look at ecosystems and the evolution of life on Earth, what we see is that even though we're told by our dominant worldview that nature is basically selfish and driven by selfish genes, in fact, when evolutionary biologists look at the history of life's growth and complexity over billions of years on Earth, there have only been a few phase shifts where we've achieved a greater complexity in life. And each of those phase shifts came about not because one species outcompeted the other, but through increases in cooperation, where different species learned that they could actually work together with mutually beneficial symbiosis for the greater good of all. So life basically evolved through cooperation. In the words of Lynn Margulis, a systems biologist, it didn't take over the world by combat, but by networking. So that gives you one sense of maybe a foundational principle that applies to ecosystems that could apply to our human civilization, where each party gains from a reciprocal relationship, leading to core concepts like fairness, justice, or equity, and individual dignity for all. And so ultimately, when we're looking at this vision of moving towards an ecological civilization, we're really looking at a transformation in values, an emphasis on the quality of life rather than material possessions, basing our choices on a sense of our shared humanity with justice and dignity for all, building civilization's future on the basis of symbiosis with the living earth, where the flourishing of the natural world is foundational. And again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to take you in detail what all the different elements of this civilization could look like. But I want to emphasize one thing, like from this image, to notice that what we're talking about is not like a shift in one thing. We're not saying, oh, we need to shift our economy or shift this or that. We're talking about a transformation of every aspect of what we call our civilization, whether it's the economy, technology, our built infrastructure, our governance, our culture and community, how we distribute wealth, etc. And it's important to recognize when we're looking at this vision of an ecological civilization, I and others are not trying to present some blueprint. We're not trying to say, okay, we've got the answer, like here's the plan, anything like that, because that by its very nature then compresses our potential for what we can imagine as possible. What we're talking about is a shared vision that all these different groups I've been looking at can co-create together. But having said that, I'll just give you a couple of hints of what this ecological civilization might actually look like in practice, so we can sort of really get our imaginations going. Well, for starters, corporations would exist for humanity rather than just shareholder returns. Many people are familiar with benefit corps or B corps, where corporations choose to change their charter, so they have to consider the impact of their decisions on multiple constituencies. Well, thousands of companies have chosen that worldwide, but it's had virtually no impact on the world to date because it's a voluntary call that no really big corporation has ever chosen to take for obvious reasons, because they don't want to diminish their shareholder returns. But what if in an ecological civilization, a triple bottom line of profit, people, and planet were required for corporate charters, fundamentally reorganizing those transnational corporations? What if every 5 years their charters had to be renewed, and only at the discretion of a community-based panel chosen by sortition, not by government regulators who are just part of a revolving door to become the next executives? So corporations, rather than just being subject to financial bankruptcy, could be subject to social or environmental bankruptcy too. In another aspect of an ecological civilization might be a really reorientation towards the commons, which we can recognize as any source of sustenance or well-being that hasn't yet been appropriated by the state or private ownership. And if we look at the commons, what that actually is goes all the way back to what life has contributed to our well-being, like the earth, atmosphere, water, and sunshine. Or look to these ancient contributions from our great ancestors, of language, cultural traditions, technology, contributions from the rise of civilization like writing, law, specialized knowledge, from the last few hundred years of knowledge about electricity, industrialization, global markets, from the last few decades of microprocessors, computer code, the internet. All that is part of a common wealth that should be available to all human beings. But then in our current civilization, somebody comes along, they tweak just a little bit of all this amazing commons, and they call it Facebook. And all of a sudden, whoever did that suddenly gets a net worth of $100 billion. Maybe this is the greatest moral egregiousness in history, when that can happen when about half the world's population earns less than $5.50 a day, the minimum required to expect basic normal life expectancy. So in an ecological civilization, there would be a recognition that this is actually the common wealth, and there's a moral right for every human being to have access to it. And one way that they could have access to it could be something like a universal basic income, which is a simple, unconditional monthly payment to every adult, sufficient to meet basic needs. And that's based on the recognition. People say, oh, you can't do that because people are lazy and they'll waste, they'll waste that. Actually, purposeful work is an integral part of human flourishing. And people have a fundamental need to feel valued by their community. And as a result of that, when we look at pilot programs of these universal basic income around the world, we see they consistently report a reduction in all that is harmful for human flourishing, like crime, child mortality, alcohol consumption, malnutrition, and an increase in all that is good, like health, gender equality, school performance, and even entrepreneurial activity. So just again, just touching on a couple of other pointers to spark the imagination. We could see potential for a UN Rights of Nature declaration, putting the natural world on the same legal standing as humanity, with personhood given to like ecosystems and rivers and high functioning mammals, and ecocide defined as an international crime. We'd be looking at a fundamental shift in our global culture from patriarchal domination to partnership systems, as has been described so well by Rian Eisler in many of her books, like about shifting to a system with equal valuing of males and female stereotypes and giving high value to empathic and caring relations. We'd be building that planetary consciousness with a hub and spoke network with cosmo-local connections, so place-based identity, local community focus on face-to-face interactions, local citizens building their own citizen action networks with trust and agency, and at the same time, building a planetary consciousness. So with things like Facebook would be converted to the commons. So rather than trying it being used to maximize profits and create advertising revenues, it would be helping to enable that sense of cosmopolitanism, sense of global citizenship, where we could celebrate our diversity of all the different cultures and groupings around the world while recognizing our deep interdependence. Ultimately, we'd be looking at a gateway through that form of civilization of humanity ultimately becoming a connected superorganism, an emergent, self-organized collective intelligence, and really consistent with the themes that I feel will be coming through this conference, enabling humanity to begin to see itself and the living earth as an integrated whole. So I've taken you at some speed through this. If you want to like delve further into my own work, these are the books I've written, The Patenting Instinct and The Web of Meaning. And I do encourage anyone who's interested in these ideas to join the conversation. There's thousands of us have now joined this network called the Deep Transformation Network, where we're basically having conversations about these pathways that could lead us toward an ecological civilization. You can see the website to join there. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I talked fast enough to allow just 5 minutes or so for any kind of Q&A. If anybody wants to ask a question about what they saw, just share reflections about what arose as I took you through this, this kind of high-level vision of what's possible for an ecological civilization. So I'll pause and see if anyone wants to share.
Thank you, Jeremy. What a treat. And I think there will be a lot of resonance in this room with the vision that you're sharing. And I think the questions might arise more about nuances, so rather than challenging your vision. So, but I will welcome anyone who wants to ask a question or propose something to share their thoughts. So please lift your virtual hand.
And I'm seeing in the chat some wonderful comments. Thank you. So anybody can also feel free to just put a question in the chat if they're a little uncomfortable about putting themselves in the sort of main screen.
Mm-hmm.
I
see a hand from Ruslan. Mm-hmm.
Ruslan.
And Jorge. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting the whole speech, but one specific thing just touch a little bit touch what I'm doing, what I'm working on now.
Right.
And very great idea that all the know-hows and the knowledge itself, all the scientific things, etc., they're supposed to belong to people, to the humanity. But humanity itself doesn't have the representative. Now we have the representation of states, of nations, of business, of some NGOs, etc. But we don't have the representative of society itself.
Yes.
Especially of the international society, global society, of the humanity. and we need to understand how we will understand. I think that it can be a shape of cooperation, some cooperative, maybe even form, yeah, which will be how to say, which will own the humanity knowledge and will have a share in every know-how in the world. You see, because
I see exactly where you're going on that, Ruslan. Thank you for that. And let me just I'll just have to I'll interrupt. I'm sorry, just in the interest of time, because we only have a couple of minutes. And I think this question you're raising of global governance is a hugely important one. And it's one, I'm actually writing a book on ecological civilization, one I'll cover in some depth. And one thing we see is, I think, the importance of subsidiarity as a principle, basically pushing power down to the grassroots level as much as possible, but also a focus on citizens' assemblies as a form of true democracy, where citizens are chosen through sortition and through well-facilitated areas, are able to come up with better forms of governance than our electoral democracy has been able to achieve so far, because of certain structural areas around that. And there's Eleanor Ostrom has written a lot about principles of the commons and applying that at a greater level, what she calls polycentric governance, where we can take those what works for deep democracy at grassroots level and apply it all the way up to a form of global governance, to avoid some sort of top-down hierarchical risk of some authoritarian style global governance telling everyone what they have to do, but really pushing power down to subsidiarity levels as far as possible, but for those issues that entail full global governance, to get a true democracy to allow that to happen. So there's a lot of detail to explore there. But let me just, I think we have maybe time for one more comment. Let's turn to Jorge. I saw your hand was up, Jorge, and then I'll back to you, Pablo. And we have to get you off mute, Jorge.
Sorry, because my image is not clear. I'm Jorge Calderon from Mexico. I'm an independent expert of the UN Harmony with Nature program. And we have been working on the rights of nature in the Americas and around the world. And you mentioned that as part of your presentation. And I would like to ask you, what do you consider the role of the right of nature in all this net of things that you are presented? I would like if you could go a little bit more deep on that issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think that is really fundamental. And as I'm sure you're aware, Jorge, there's a lot of work being done by legal scholars around the world to establish rights of nature in constitutions. We've seen that most clearly in places like Bolivia, where, I'm sorry about that. I got an emergency alert came on my phone. But we see that actually in different places around the world, where rights of nature is a fundamental, is being shifted towards being recognized in constitutions. So I think that any kind of work that is being done, where a person is being given to rivers in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and other places around the world, these are actually foundational pieces. They may seem like little small incremental improvements or whatever on the grand scheme, but what they're doing is they're shifting the paradigm. They're shifting the ways in which people actually look at the human relationship with the rest of nature. And there are ways being formed quite well where people can be assigned as representatives to those natural rights. And ultimately, we could see a situation where basically any institution that was making decisions, whether corporations or nonprofit institutions or governmental institutions, always had somebody there representing the rest of non-humans in their area. And you could even extend that to future generations too. It doesn't have to just be the rights of nature. It could also be the rights of future human generations, as well as non-humans, can have representatives. So when we're making decisions, we're not doing it just for those who are able to have the voice in the room right now, but those who don't yet have that voice. So those are some of the ideas. Thank you for that. In the interest of time, let me pass it back to you, Pavel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Deep appreciation and a kind of round of virtual applause to you. A very powerful message indeed. I also sense a lot of resonance. I know, knowing the work of some people in this room, that I already mentioned today, I sense this forum being a sort of tribe coming together, or a fractal kind of crystal revealing itself through different sides that we begin to see. And it's beautiful that you are bringing a few thousand people together to explore that vision. And for example, Marilyn Hamilton, through her work on integral cities and living cities Earth, does this in a different part of the world, but with very, very similar resonant topics. I have just published my book, which is being distributed to forum participants, which actually talks about so many subjects that are very, very similar to what you described. So I feel we are here also to know about each other's work and also to learn about facets of it, because when you were mentioning commons earlier in your talk, in the first session today, Francois Tadei from Learning Planet Institute was talking about the need of a new type of a learning and research institution, which we can call University for the Planet, which actually can serve the cultivation of these human commons, and exactly working from the perspective of this nodes, spikes, and hubs system. So thank you for bringing this all in, and it's so beautiful to discover these resonances, these symphonies, as Alexander Laszlo expresses.
Mm-hmm.